I think we need to remember that everybody comes into the room from a different place, and both historically in their lives and in their identity, but also just in their day. And so beginning every time you gather with a group of people, in other words, meeting, begin it with something simple like a...
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to this. I'm your host, Shauna Griffiths, and today's Real Talk is with a real leader who I met recently through our mutual friends at changeforce.ai. So Bob Gower, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on today.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. So folks, we're going to do a little bit different than we usually do today. I usually start out with someone's evolution. We're going to bring you closer to what Bob is doing right now, and then we're going to do a bit of a backtrack. But I'll also share Bob is a writer, speaker, and author. He's got 2 books. We'll go into that. And Bob and I are both now a part of the changeforce.ai consulting arm. And so if changeforce.ai sounds familiar to you folks as you're listening, good. That means that you've been listening. George Swisher and Nabil Ahmed, who are the co-founders of changeforce.ai, have both been on the show. But if you missed the show, just to catch you up a little bit, it's a company that actually started as a SaaS AI tool that back in 2018, it was powered by OpenAI. And they really focus on helping clients see their blind spots, helping to create that action that drives that business impact. So now their latest move has, as they say, is up in their game to develop this consulting arm. So that gives you a little bit of a background and kind of starts to connect dots between how Bob and I know each other and how we're moving some things forward. So this consulting arm is really pairing that AI software with human experts. So that's where people like Bob come in and that I will come in. And then we're basically people's co-pilots. So with all that said, I want to be done speaking. And Bob, I would love for you to talk to people about your area of expertise in with the Changeforce AI consulting. And that helps to give a bit of a peek into your evolution, which we'll get into next.
Yeah. So I work with team development and organization design. Those are sort of the main 2 areas I look at. And a lot of people don't know what those mean, or there are a lot of different opinions. Actually, I was coaching a new consultant today, and I was like, you kind of have to find your intellectual themes within those fields, right? Because there's a lot of different opinions about what is an organization, how to optimize it, how to make it work better. My focus is really on treating organizations as complex communities of people. And I look at teams as kind of, rather than looking at the individual as the unit, which is the way a lot of organizations, these matrix organizations operate, I look at the team as the primary unit, because I believe that in these sort of volatile, complex, difficult times we find ourselves in order to get work done, you have to combine a variety of skill sets and a variety of perspectives, which means you need small, generally small, cross-functional and diverse teams that are working on relatively well-defined problems, but also are able to evolve and manage themselves in a certain way, that have a lot of individual agency. And creating organizations and creating teams that work well can be really challenging. And then 2, creating organizations of these sort of team structures is also challenging. And so those are the 2 things that I primarily work on.
Got it. So give people an idea of, in this role with changeforce.ai, if you're working with them, what does it actually mean and what does it look like?
Yeah. So when I think about, I focus again on the team. That's sort of where I like to start. So if I'm working with an organization, I'm usually working with a leadership team, and then often with the teams that report into that. Like yesterday, I was with a legal team of a very large multinational media company whose name you would know, but whose name I don't want to share.
Yeah.
But all of the people in the room, I was working with about 15 people in the room, and each of them have, teams of people that report to them and report to them and report to them, right? Like it's sort of like this large group. But what I believe and what I've noticed is that the way that leadership team functions and the way they're able to collaborate, they're able to have disagreements, resolve those disagreements, create plans, create shared accountability together, that has a huge impact on the rest of the organization. And so once we kind of get that team working well, we can then begin to sort of talk about how do we work on the rest of the organization? Do we need to restructure in any way? Do we need to retool in any way? So the way I use Changeforce, it's sort of a sentiment analysis tool. Like it allows me to sort of, we feed in some data into it. We do some listening in the organization. We say, what kind of behaviors are happening? What's really going on when it comes to core things about collaboration? I mentioned a few of them, like sharing information, decision making. Are people waiting around for other people to finish work before they can do their work? All of these things which impact team performance. And then from there, we can begin to sort of tinker with that team, both on an interpersonal level, because often it's relationships which are the core, but then also there's these operational pieces, like what tools we're using, what our planning cycle is, what kind of meetings we have, how efficient are those meetings, how do we share information, can we find stuff, what do we know about each other? There's all running an organization, running a team is can be extremely complex, and sometimes it can be you can see the impact, what's going wrong, but you're like, why is that thing going wrong? And sort of Changeforce helps me, it gives me one more layer or one more angle of information as we go in and try to solve those problems.
Yeah. I told you when I was preparing for this call or this recording, I obviously rabbit holed into you, and I got more and more excited as I was doing that for this call, because so much of what I talk about is leadership, and it's the people who are in the seats of leadership. And when you do have that team structure in an organization that is a leadership team, the dynamics that can go on there are just I don't even know the word for it. It's really intense, and I think that I love the way you're talking about the way that you work and what you're trying to do, because I think so many times a leadership team is kind of looking outward at everybody else. But I love what you're doing. It's like, wait a second, if leadership literally comes from the top, then what is that structure of that team, and how efficient and effective are they being to be that resource for the people? And so I just think too oftentimes people don't, as leaders and a leadership team, don't actually look at themselves and go, wait, we need to fix ourselves first.
They don't even think of themselves as a team, honestly.
Right.
Leadership teams don't, right? They think of themselves as mini CEOs of their own little domains.
Yeah.
I don't mean to sound belittling, because it's
No.
it's a natural human tendency.
Yeah.
But they think of themselves, like if you're the head of marketing, you think of yourself as the head of marketing. You don't think of yourself as being on the leadership team, right? Or you don't. I mean, some people do, but many people don't, or they don't think of, or they think of marketing as their first team and their leadership team as this kind of annoying group that they have to update on occasion. And argue with on occasion in order to get the resources and get the tools that they need in order to do a good job.
Yeah.
And I try to turn that on its head and say, no, actually your first job, your first team is this leadership team that you're on, because you're setting the tone for the entire rest of the organization. I've worked with some very, very, very big companies in my career. I've also worked with some very small companies, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of startups. But I found at big companies, you hit this problem, especially where you can have two divisions or two groups. Often it's like technology and the business, like the marketing people and the people who are building the thing, right? In these big tech companies. And you'll go down and you'll see that they're actually almost at war with each other. It's like they work for two different companies. It's like they don't care about the P&L that they're both really a part of, where everything rolls up. They only care about their domain. And then you'll start doing some research and try to figure out, like, well, where does this problem start? Why does this problem exist? And I just started laddering up, and I would find myself sitting sometimes with the head of the business and the head of the head of technology. And I'd find that they generally got along, but they had a couple of fundamental, mild almost disagreements, that because they were telling their direct reports something slightly different, who were then telling their direct reports something slightly different, who were then telling their direct, like it's sort of, as you go down the organization, it's like the butterfly effect, right? The flapping of the wings up here creates these hurricanes down here.
Oh yeah.
So what I find is that I really have to push leadership teams to have difficult conversations. One of the most useful exercises I've ever done, if anybody wants to take this, feel free.
Yeah.
It's not mine. I stole it from somebody else, but is I just take a team and I say, everybody write down what this team should be discussing, but isn't. Just write it down. And now let's put it up on a wall on Post-it notes, because I'm a consultant. We love to put Post-it notes on a wall. And then we're like, okay, let's prioritize them. And then let's just have the conversation. And I just make the space and be like, treat each other nice, let's have good debate rules and good conversational, good interpersonal, boundary rules, but let's just have the conversation. And that one exercise, honestly, people will come up to me afterwards and be like, "Oh my God, that was amazing. That was the best thing we've ever done." And I'm like, I just sat here, like I
Yeah.
just told you what to talk about.
Yeah.
And it moves things forward in really substantially, powerfully in good ways in my
Yeah,
experience.
I'm sure. Yeah, some people are like, thank you, because I've been a part of leadership teams where it's like people are just quiet and you know what other people are thinking, and you're sitting there thinking, well, what the hell are we doing? And why are we not talking about this? And you try to have the conversation and then it gets shut down. And so, I had, because I've been in those situations, I can truly appreciate the work that you're doing. So I'm just really glad, for you to be able to share this. And I appreciate you sharing tips, because there's so many people who are, listening in the audience who are at that level and they are on those teams. And it's like, what the hell do I do? And who do I turn to and things like that. So it's great to know there's resources out there, and we don't all have to sit in those situations just kind of either, I would say suffer, but air quotes suffer.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, so that's great. Thank you so much for sharing all that. So from there, I want to dive back into your background, because clearly you have evolved into the position that you are now. And I say position just like where you are in your evolution, and really focusing on this area. But I'd love for you to share with people like how you got there. And part of it is, when I was reading your profile, it says you went from a cult survivor to an organization designer,
Yeah.
and really focusing on influencing that systemic change. So, and I just, again, I found it, I don't know, exciting to read that. And I was like, see, there are people out there who are really trying to make that change in these dysfunctional environments. So can
Yeah.
you tell people a bit about like your path and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I mean, my path starts even a little bit before, being in a cult, and which I will share a little bit about here.
Good.
And I'm working on a memoir, by the way, so hopefully in a couple of years that'll be on the bookshelves. But the I've always been kind of a leftist do-gooder kind of person at my core. Like I've always been kind of interested in like how I can contribute to leaving the world a bit better than I found it, and I'm especially interested in sustainability and equity. Right, like how do we stay around on the planet as a species a little bit longer, and also how do we spread the good stuff that we create with more of us, right? And
Yeah.
how do we invite more people into the room and into the table? And what I found is that, it's a tough problem. That's not even or a wicked problem, as systems theorists like to say, right? It's really a challenging set of issues because it involves all sorts of cognitive biases,
Yeah.
cultural norms, and also like technology, and even just like really weird nuts and bolts things. Like it all comes back to energy and food. Actually, quite a bit of this does, right? In terms of
Hmm.
the environment, right?
Uh-huh.
That's where a lot of the problems get created
Yeah.
is in the production of energy and the production and transport of food. And so I was always really interested in that. I did a graduate degree in sustainable systems, or it was an MBA, but it was focused on sustainable management, on creating these kind of more sustainable systems. And while I was in school, I really became fascinated with this idea. I used to be a visual designer, so I became fascinated with the idea of form following function. Right, I'm a minimalist. I love the Bauhaus movement and the Eames and all of that kind of stuff. And what I found was that I became really interested in how teams operate, how that impacted what they were able to do in the world, right? And so I would work for nonprofits, and I would see these nonprofits just treating each other horribly. If any of your listeners have been, or if you spend any time in nonprofits,
Yeah.
you know that they can be some of the most dysfunctional organizations on the planet. They can be
Yeah.
truly, truly. I've seen more bullying. I've seen more
Yeah.
dysfunctional behavior within the nonprofit sector than almost anywhere else. And I've worked with like big oil, like so,
Yeah.
which is kind of nuts, right? But so the intent is good, but the organization design is bad. And even though the organization might be doing some good, ultimately, my feeling was that they were actually doing something potentially quite bad.
Yeah.
Likewise, if you look at these more traditional industries, when they try to change technology, when they try to change something fundamental about them, they smack up against the same set of problems, which is like we've got humans and we're trying to get humans to do something different. And that's really, really, really hard work.
Yeah.
So, long story short, I did like at one point in my life, I became very interested in this organization that was a nonprofit. I thought it was there to make the world a better place. And what I found is after a couple of years, I lived with all of the people. We worked together.
Oh
It
wow.
was, I actually don't want to name the organization right now because there's some potential legal cases open, but there is a Netflix documentary about it. So people through
Oh
context
wow.
clues might be able to find it and might see my face at some point in it, even though it's a
Oh
little
wow.
embarrassing. But it was very much a cultic dynamic. And cults, I define, I borrow a definition from Michael Langone, who is the director of the International Cultic Studies Association. And that's just an organization characterized by sort of extreme devotion, manipulative persuasion, and causing harm to other people, right? So this idea that that it's a kind of an organizational dynamic, and it's a
Yeah.
somewhat natural dynamic when you have a charismatic person who maybe can get people to do what they want, get people to believe what they want them to, manipulate them slightly, get this devotion from them, and not really care about the impact it has on the individual or has on the society that they operate inside of. So I have a talk where I go into this in some detail, but we look at other organizations like WeWork, like Theranos, like Bernie
Yeah.
Madoff, Enron to a certain degree, that I think have very, very much cultic dynamics. So rather than, I don't divide the world into cult and non-cult, I divide the
Mhm.
world into good organization and not so good organization. Cult is
Right.
a flavor of not so good organization, and there's a gradient between the two. Some organizations can be really good in some ways and really bad in some ways. Um, so I'm always sort of interested. So I guess I've just developed a sort of deep interest in what we would call pro-social organizations. How do we create
Yeah.
organizations that are good for the owners, good for the people who work there, good for
Yeah.
the societies they operate in, and hopefully are not doing any harm to any specific other human communities or ecosystems and the climate, right? And this is, I don't plan to make, I'm 57 now. I don't plan to make much progress on this in my life, but I want to contribute to that conversation, right? Like
Yes.
it's just not something that we're going to solve, right? It's just
No.
something that we need to kind of be getting always better at as a species, I think. So
Yeah.
that's the task that I work on.
Yeah. It's so needed, I have to say. Again, I've seen, whether it's clients or places I've worked, whatever, I've seen that dynamic so many times.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because I think the amount that people talk about culture in an organization, and it's like chips in the kitchen or coffee or beers after and those type of things. I think a lot of times those are actually used as like manipulation tactics, that it just keeps perpetuating what's going on in an organization. And so, and we've seen so much where over the last several years where employees are opting out, they're doing other things, they're trying to disrupt the system. So again, I'm just, as what part of why I was so excited to have this conversation, because in my own journey and my efforts, I part of why I have this podcast is to hope to create some sort of energy shift, or to bring more people forward like you who are of that mindset of truly trying to create this ecosystem of an organization that it's working for everybody. And that's why a lot of people in those leadership seats, it's like, if the person in that leadership seat either catches themselves or says out loud, I'm not a good leader,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't care about the people, says it or acts like it. Those are all things where it's like that actually happens. And so, again, that's why I say like this is so needed. And I'm really glad to, hear you speak about it. And I think there's a lot of people in the audience who have been in this situation, seen this situation. So I guess in when you caught yourself in that situation, or you became aware of yourself in
Yeah.
that situation, like, how did you find your voice or your way forward, or what did you actually do?
So that's a really deep question, right? In a lot of ways, right? And so
Yeah.
the short answer is that I got out of the group very accidentally. I was in for
Oh,
2 years, and at one point I lost my leadership position. We also, we were moving one residence to another. There was a lot of disruption.
okay.
And I momentarily just had this moment where I was like, I think I'm going to try something else. I found myself not living there anymore, a little bit outside. And then for a couple of years, it was just like, oh, that was a weird experience that I'm
I
still
see.
trying to, and it's a gap in my resume that I have a hard time explaining.
Oh,
But that was all it was for me for a couple of years. and then I was describing the experience to somebody, and he handed me a book on Cultic Dynamics, a wonderful book called "Take Back Your Life." If anybody suspects they've ever been a part of one of these organizations or has a loved one in, it's Janja Lalich is the author's name, and it's called "Take Back Your Life." It's a wonderful book. And as I read the book, it's by a cult recovery expert, and I began reading, and I was like, oh my God, this thing wasn't unique and special. This thing was actually a part. It's actually very predictable because
Oh,
cultic dynamics are in many ways very. Cult indoctrination is extremely well understood, and I think there are a lot of people out there who actually study it. So anyway, I didn't really know for the longest time that I was in a cult, and then I was like, well, wait, was I?
mm,
And I even still talk to other people who are in the group, and I use the word, and they're like, well, I don't feel that way myself. And I'm like, well,
yeah.
I get that. Either you're rationalizing or maybe you had a different experience than me, which is totally fine.
Hmm.
It's personal. It's not global. So, but you did mention culture there a little while. So I was just sort of like, I'm very interested in building good cultures,
Right.
but I think you're exactly right that we often think of culture as perks, like, oh, we're all going to have a pizza party, or we're all going to be like really excited to work here. We're all going to, like that's a good culture. So one of the best stories of the past, or best, one of my favorite stories, which is a
Okay.
bad story, it was about WeWork, where people were convinced they were changing the world by renting office space, right? Like, and you see the Adam Newman, who is this very, very charismatic individual. You see him at the front of the room telling people literally that they are going to change the world, that they are making the world a better place. And but they rented office space. That, I mean, it's a fine business. Like I worked out of their offices. They were all right, right? It didn't change my life, and I don't think they were really changing anybody's life. And so it's this idea of, it's almost like this sort of, but they were trying to kind of create this sort of like excited community. So again, like that extreme devotion, right? Kind of
Right.
thing. But there's also this thing of manipulative persuasion and that emotional persuasion. So we think about engagement as this thing where people are like, I'm so excited to be here, but are you, like, do you need to be it in order to do a good job, right? Like,
Right.
I think of work as I don't know, should be largely transactional in a certain way. It doesn't mean you can't like the people you work with and be in
Yeah.
and care about your product or care about your service or care about your work, but it just means that, like, let's have some appropriate levels of engagement, and let's be real about what I'm offering and what I'm getting, and
Yeah.
why I'm here. Like, let's just be more honest with each other. That's kind of all I'm kind of after.
Yeah. I think it's so great. I think there is this almost, I was going to say twisted. I don't know if that's the right word, but it is this thing where at the end of the day, I had to actually come to grips with my own priorities in life.
So
And
yeah.
I think that go from that, like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited and my work is my life and everything, to your point of having like the appropriate relationship with work and the appropriate way of thinking about it. And it actually was really freeing for me to be able to see that the life I could live was, I say, more rich almost,
Hmm.
and had different things going on and things like that. So, I just, again, I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's also great as people are listening to this, and as whether you could be somebody who was in a situation like this and you're starting to realize it, and it's like, it's okay. And so some people, we process it later, and there are things out there that can help you kind of understand it and figure out, okay, how do I want to move forward? And I think these type of things also can help us just to identify
Hmm.
things that we do and don't want in our next steps, in the
Yeah.
next place that we go. And so, I think some of it just comes to like our own awareness, again, that processing and that thought of what do we want in the next phase of our evolution.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is that organization design is the job of the leaders, right? Like, so if you're a leader of an organization, whether you want to or not, that is part of your job, right? And whether you are actively and consciously doing it or not, you are doing it. Every time you create a policy, make a rule, and often even just say something, just by virtue of your positional authority within the organization, your words have much more weight than
Right.
sort of a coworker's words might have. And so you're actually creating patterns, you're creating structures, you're often creating policies, you're often creating like very concrete things, and sometimes you're creating these sort of more abstract things, but they have a real impact on how that organization operates. My work, and by the way, I hope people aren't taking away that Bob only cares about like how happy people are at work, or that kind of thing. I mean, I care about that a great deal, But I do care about company performance. Like like financial performance is important to
Right.
me. Market performance is important. But I just don't believe that you create a strong and resilient organization by manipulating people or by ordering them around and telling them what to do all of the time. Right? Everybody wants to have a little bit more agency in their lives. One of my favorite case studies is a company called Bertzorg. It's the largest, I think it's the largest now, home health organization in the Netherlands. And they have 11,000 nurses who go out and take care of people in their homes. And they have 50 people running the business side. 50 people running for 11,000
Wow.
frontline people. And the way they do that is they organize those 11,000 people into groups of 12, no larger than 12, and they say you're responsible for everybody within this region. Any case that comes up within this particular area, this geographical area, that's yours, and it's your job to provide health care to those people. It's your job to make sure that they get healthy, because it's often like post-surgery, and get them off of our service, because that's one of the measures of success. And what they found is, I think it was McKinsey or somebody did a study of this company a few years ago, and by every single conceivable performance measure, they do better than their competition, and not by just a little bit, right? By whether it's financial performance, whether it's the amount of time people spend under care. They're consistently called one of the best places to work, or voted one of the best places to work within the Netherlands, right? And so all of these things, so we can do good by the people
Yeah.
and do good by the customer and make some money along the way. We don't need to be Logan Roy or or whatever, from Succession, right? We don't need to be
Yeah.
the bastard at the top in order to live a good life, in order to create really good organizations. As a matter of fact, I think those models of leadership really work against us creating good organizations for the most part.
Yeah, absolutely. When you said that, I wanted to like clap my hands because it is really true. It's like you don't have to be an asshole to be the person at the top.
You
You can be the
don't,
person at the top and actually really care about the
yeah.
people, the health of the business. And one of the things when I actually created SLG Impact, and the reason I says it's evolving brands and people is a tagline, and it's because I truly believe the two go hand in hand, and
Yeah.
I've often said as I've led people that the work will take care of itself when the people have what they need, and when we can have that open dialogue and we feel set up for success. And I mean, it's not that easy, I'm oversimplifying it, but I just like wholeheartedly agree that there is an element of, it's not just about happy people, but people who feel more empowered, able to do their job, safe, all of those things. Then you tend to have, I think, better work and better performance. And, to your point, like you're actually creating business impact as a leader when you're facilitating an environment that way.
100%. Yeah. I mean, businesses are here to serve us. We're not here to serve them, right? We're not here, but it often feels like the opposite. There's two very strange things that are true, I think, simultaneously. One is that humans, if you look at sort of there's I don't know if you know the work of E.O. Wilson. He was a biologist, and basically he pointed out that humans are a eusocial or hypersocial species. We're more social than any other primate, and a
Oh,
lot of that means like you will run out into the street to save a baby, somebody else's baby who you don't know and have never met. No other primate on the planet will do that. Like all other primates will, you know, eat the baby, or whatever, right? Like chimpanzees especially, right? Like, and we're, somewhat chimp-like in our behavior at times as well.
yeah.
But the other, so one is that we just like to be together. We like to do things together. We care about each other. We care about our neighbors. You sit down to somebody, even if they're politically or identity, they have an identity that you're not familiar with or something like that, you'll very quickly find something to bond. Most people will very quickly find a way to bond together. But also the other thing that's true is most people hate their job and hate their work and think that corporate America is a soul crushing thing. And I'm like, how are these two things true, right? Because on the
Oh,
one
yeah.
hand, we do want to work in some ways. Like we want to do stuff with people. It gives us meaning. It gives us a sense of purpose, um, and it certainly pays the bills too, right? So why can't we begin to combine these two things together? Why can't we create organizational structures and systems and policies and procedures and habits and culture that really serve people, but also create productive, valuable, interesting products and services and all of the things that we need in order to live? Why can't we do that I don't know, because I think it's just a tough problem. And I think we're stuck in this kind of strange paradox most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, so many people will have an idea that this type of work, doing this type of work, I don't know if that's the right way to talk about it, but like the
Yeah.
work that you do
Yeah.
is kind of soft. It's a nice to
Hmm.
have. You know,
Right.
it's like, oh, we need to get over here and just make money. We need to get over here and just like drive revenue. And again, it's that connection, I think, that is so key. And I'm so glad that you focus on it and that you bring it forward. And I'm curious, I know I said this earlier, you have two books, and I'd love for you
Yeah.
to talk about, like, is this what a lot of what you talk about in the books, or tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. Again, the thing that I sort of focus on, and actually this may become a new book, it may become a new talk, I'm not quite sure. But it's certainly what I offer through Changeforce is to your last point here, is I call it effective teamwork or effective
Hmm.
teaming. And the reason I say effective is because I want teams that are able to do important stuff in the world. Efficiency sometimes helps with that. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the most effective thing you can do is rather inefficient.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing innovative and creative work, it can be
Okay.
highly inefficient at times. So I don't want to focus on efficiency, but I do want people to know that if they hire me, I'm going to care about their bottom line. I'm going to care about
Right.
their financial performance. It is an integral and essential piece of the puzzle, but it is not the. But I don't know how to describe it. Sometimes you have to take that. Sometimes the way you get there is a little bit different, right? Especially if
Right.
you're trying to build a resilient organization with low turnover, with an engaged workforce, and all of those kinds of things. Sometimes you have to turn yourself away from a pure efficiency mindset at times, right?
Right.
So my books, one book I wrote about over 10 years ago now. Geez, wow. And I wrote it with a team of people that I was working with not far from you up in Boulder. We were agile software consultants. So we were doing large scale organizational change, creating this sort of agile software development, which is basically the principles of lean theory as applied to
Mm.
computer systems and the development of complex systems. And so it was just sort of a book for me. I was like, I'm working with some really smart people and I want to learn from them. So the excuse I had was I got everybody to write a chapter or write a short essay for
Brilliant.
me. And then I wrote I edited them and I wrote the kind of the structure of that book,
That's
and
awesome.
we published it together, and it was a really fun project.
That's
And then the
great.
second book I wrote we just actually published it during the pandemic. I wrote it with my wife, and it was really about how to have difficult conversations with people that you're going to do something important with.
Okay.
So it could, it could be about getting married or going on vacation or going to see
Yeah.
your family or something like the things that bring potential stress into your relationship, or it could be about starting a large scale change project inside of your
Mhm.
organization or running a new team or something like that. So we have various sort of scripts and frameworks and models within that book. It's very much we thought of this book as a tool because it was like, this is what we do. This is how we approach these conversations with teams. We want you to be able to do it the same. So the idea when we wrote the book was we wanted it almost to be a manual for people to take into their
Mm.
next difficult conversation and be like, how can I follow some simple steps to maybe have this thing go a little bit better rather than blow up in my face? Because so often, right, we're talking about something really challenging and important, and then it goes completely off the rails, and people are like, how did that happen? I came with good faith. I think you came with good faith, but somehow we end up thinking each other is the devil right now, and we can't talk anymore. And so we were just sort of trying to look at that.
Yeah. It's so great. I mean, what a great resource to be out there for people, like for leaders, for other people who are just a part of that. Because there's, I think, like it's just this ongoing change that we're seeing in the marketplace, and I
Yeah.
think that it is so easy, and I've seen this, I've been a part of it too many times, where it's like we're going to make this wide sweeping change and we're just going to do it, and it looks
Yeah.
good
Right.
on paper, and we're just going to do it, and we're going to do it quickly, and move it forward, and because I said so.
Right.
And I mean, I cannot, I think, like, you cannot underestimate how hard it
Yeah.
is to actually implement that
Yeah.
change. And I think too often it's like the change wants to happen overnight. And just because you flip on a light switch, it's literally, as I said that, I thought about this. In the morning when you flip on the light switch and your eyes have to take a moment to like get used to the bright light. I feel like that is such a parallel to these sweeping changes that happen to organizations.
Right.
And there really has to be that time where like the pupils can dilate, people can get on board and all that. And everybody wants it to happen so much more quickly, that adoption and moving it forward. So I love that you created a tool to help give people the language for how to have the conversations, how to move those things forward.
Can I give you my two favorite things
Please.
to suggest to your readers who might, or
Yes,
your
please.
listeners who might be here? So, um, and they kind of like feed off of things you just said. So, one piece is that we need to remember that we are all people at the end of the day, right? And so when you treat somebody, when you do a command and control move like you just did, sometimes you need to, right? I mean,
Right.
like if I'm, if I'm in a crisis situation, and we're dealing with a car accident or something like that, and somebody needs to take control and somebody needs to order people around, that's totally fine, and I think it's necessary at times. But most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, we don't need to. And I think we need to remember that everybody comes into the room from a different place, and both historically in their lives and in their identity, but also just in their day. And so, beginning every time you gather with a group of people, in other words, meeting, begin it with something simple like a question that everybody answers. That is a personal question. We call it a check-in round or a opening round. And like I'll ask questions like, "What are your three favorite condiments?" Just like, and you learn something about it. Like yesterday, when I was doing this bigger thing with this bigger group, I said, "What's the biggest risk you've ever taken?" And I learned like within 20 minutes, we learned an incredible amount about each other. We felt closer to each other, and therefore we were able to bond in a new way. And then when we got to the difficult stuff, we were able to talk about it and engage with it in a new way. So
Yeah.
that's thing one. Thing two is I think we also need to remember that the way our organizations and our relationships and our teams function, it's never done. We always need to be improving. So periodically, hopefully, every couple of weeks, maybe every month, you need to bring your team together and just sort of ask what's working,
Yes.
where are we getting stuck, what should we try and do differently. You need to pause. You need to get out of the work, stay as a team,
Yeah.
but get out of the work and look at the team as its own thing, as its own unit, and commit to always getting a little bit better all the time, always trying new things, always experimenting, and
Yeah.
don't ever assume that you've got things perfect, because I guarantee you that you don't, and you
Yeah.
never will. So
I love those two. Thank you for sharing those two. And on the last one, I think it's so important. Because I think part of it is when you have that, and I refer to it a lot as evolving mindset, where it's
mhm.
like you're going to continue to evolve whatever you've created, the dynamic, the brand, the company, the whatever, the widget that you're trying to sell.
Yeah,
And I think that especially when you're in a seat of leadership, when you have people around asking that question, I think it invites people to feel free to
yeah,
share and to say like, because if not, it's like, oh, I don't really know if I can say this. And, you know, I've also think it's helpful even to say like, as a leader, what can I do differently to help to facilitate, to set you up for success, to facilitate us moving forward?
right,
And again, I think it's really helpful just to give that almost like permission and invitation to
yeah.
people to share openly. And I think that's where you get like the team working together.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise, the only thing that the only other option is that things have to get really bad before someone speaks up, before
Yeah.
something has to change, or you have to start. People are starting to quit, and you're like, wait, why are people quitting? What's going on, right?
Right, right.
I worked with a company a while ago, and it was a nonprofit that had a lot of people without college degrees who were doing a lot of field work, and they had a bad culture. Their culture report was really bad, and we're like, why is it bad? And I knew the CEO personally. He's a lovely human being. And when I polled the company, I did all this research, and I found that everybody loved the leader, everybody loved the mission, everybody loved the work. What they hated was they had this antiquated expense reporting system that required them like 4 to 6 weeks and 4 to 6 hours a week per person in order to process their receipts, because they
Oh,
were all out in
wow.
the field all week long. They'd come back to the office on Friday and they'd have to process their receipts. And it was like this antiquated system that they couldn't get rid of, and that was what was eroding their culture, right? And so like but they were losing people because of a thing that could be fixed, that could be
Right.
easily fixed, right? That
Right.
wasn't mysterious. And I think until you really talk to people and listen to people and have some humility about, hey, this is for you, it's not for me. This organization is for you as the worker, not for me as the boss. Then we can kind of begin to craft these organizations that work for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh. You must, as you were saying that, I was just thinking, you must have such an impact, when you're working with companies. And I'm like, I could think of so many people. I'm like, boy, I wish I could bring Bob into it and, really help that organization.
Well,
So
I am for hire, so
yes, exactly.
let me know.
Exactly. No, I just I'm I'm so grateful to be having this conversation. Because I think, again, for people who are listening, it's like there's other ways. There's other ways of being, there's other ways of doing things. So I think when people are feeling disgruntled, or that it's this gives resources, this gives a bit of hope, this gives
Yeah.
just it's just an eye that not all organizations will operate that way. So so this is awesome. Thank you so much. I know we're running short on time, but you and I were messaging over the weekend, and I had said, oh, I'll send you the invite when I'm back from this ride, and you said you ride. And so I
Yeah.
actually was curious, with someone who works in the, like, I would imagine a lot of what you do is very cerebral, thinking through things and planning, and you're constantly connecting dots and stuff. I'm just curious, you said you're a cyclist. Do you use your cycling, and that, is it a bit of a, is it your mind is busy thinking about the work, or do you keep it separate, or how
Yeah.
do you use that as a tool, or do you not?
No, that's a great question. So I live in New York City, and so my cycling is in New York City. I don't own a car. I don't get out of the city much.
Yeah.
Well, I do occasionally, but most of my cycling, I'll cycle up to Central Park from Brooklyn, or out to Prospect Park and do a couple of laps there, out to Red Hook, and those are my three usual rides.
Yeah.
I like to ride places that I know, so I can kind of turn my mind. I don't have to like concentrate on the ride. I can just kind of be physical,
Uh-huh.
and be moving. Though I do enjoy the views.
Yeah.
Like I can see the Statue of Liberty from one of my rides, which is wonderful. But I ride in, I guess, suppose two main modes. Mode I always ride in a relaxed way. I used to like ride really fast and really far, and I don't do that anymore. I'm too old and perhaps too wise. It's a good way to die in New York City, is to be in a rush on a
Yes.
bicycle.
Yes.
But I'll either, and this is maybe a little embarrassing, I'll have a podcast or a book on tape in one ear. I only have it in one ear. I don't have it in both, so I can pay attention. But like right now, I'm reading a book which is an Intro to Psych 101 kind of thing,
Oh,
by a professor at University of Toronto, who it just came out, and I'm just like, it's been years since I've taken this. Let me update some things, or let's do a podcast or something
yeah.
like that. So I'm taking in information and I'm kind of thinking about things. Or mode two is kind of what you say, where it's sort of like I have all this stuff going on in my head and I need to kind of clear it out,
Yeah.
and I need to kind of get out and sometimes I'll talk to myself, or
Right.
like talk through problems. I'll pretend I'm giving a talk. I'll pretend I'm facilitating something,
Yeah.
just as a way to sort of like test things out and let all of the chaos of the world, because like the stuff that the things I operate on are really complex and really uncertain and really vague and weird sometimes, and I
Yeah.
don't even know what's going on some of it. I have to be very comfortable with uncertainty. So taking it all in, sometimes it'll just sort of like you get out somewhere and you'll be like, oh, that's what's going on. I think that's what's going on. I think that's what I'm going to try next. And it can be and being on a bike can be super helpful for that.
Yeah, I asked partly because I don't know if you actually know this, but I do a series of writings every Sunday. I call it Sunday Stories, and it's usually I've been out on a ride, and it's usually something that has dawned on me during a ride, and it is
Mm.
sometimes that freedom, that space to be like, oh, and it might be something that happens on the bike or bike related, but there's such a parallel to work, and it's like sorting through that. And so I completely identify with what you're saying. And I partly bring that up because I think for people who are listening, sometimes it's like I want to help people to know that there are options for going for a walk, and they're doing those type of things, or something active where you move your body and you can kind of turn off your brain a little bit, but it actually engages the brain to come up with some sort of, you know, connections and aha moments. So it's just a fun tool, I think, to be able to
That
utilize.
sounds great. Yeah. I mean, it reminds, so the other thing that I do quite religiously, I basically do it every single day. Are you familiar with The Artist's Way as a book?
No.
It's a relatively influential book. It's one of those books that you just sort of like, once you start talking to, you find like all these people, all these writers and actors and people that you enjoy have all been into it. I think I found it through um, one of the people from The Office. I can't remember her name. Anyway, it was like from her autobiography, and I was like, and she mentioned how powerful it was. And my wife, who's a painter, had done it. But essentially, one of the core practices is they call it morning pages, and it's you write about 750 words extemporaneously and somewhat directionless. You just sort of like what's in there is kind of what you're asking yourself. And I used to be a meditator. I used to be a morning exerciser. I used to do yoga in the morning, but I'm also a very, very verbal person. And I find there's something about this which it's just been transformative for me. I've been doing it for about 3 years now. I've got notebooks upon notebooks that I actually can't read because I can't read my handwriting.
Right.
But I just sit down and I write it takes about 45 minutes, but I do it on first waking every morning. And it's
Oh, that's
similar to
awesome.
what you say, where all of that stuff suddenly kind of congeals into something. And sometimes I'll get the seed of a piece, I'll get
Right.
a LinkedIn post, I'll get a conversation that I need to have with a friend because we've had
Yeah.
something going on, like,
Right.
but I don't know until I sit down and do it. And it just emerges from the process. It's so, so powerful for me.
That's so cool. I didn't know it's called Zwei.
It's called The Artist's Way.
Oh, the artist's way. Good Lord, what
Yeah.
was in my
Yeah.
ears? I
Yeah.
know I've heard of it. I've heard of
Yeah.
it. I've never done it. All
Yeah.
right. So
So
that is
it's a 12-week program, but the
right.
core of it is these morning pages, and then they do it other. And I've done it twice, maybe 3 times, like the 12 weeks. But
Yeah.
I keep the morning pages all the time. I'll even do it often on the weekends as well. Sometimes a little truncated, but I pretty much do it. Yeah, I just keep a notebook by my chair in my office here, and my cat comes and sits on my lap while I do it every morning. She
Oh.
gets upset if I don't now. She's like, it's a
She's
little
like, "Hey,
insufferable.
where's my time,
She's like,
Dad?"
where are you? Yeah.
That's so funny. Well, I thank you so much for your generosity during this conversation. You offered great tips, tools. It's awesome, and again, I thank you on my behalf, but also for the audience. So. Before we get off, I end every episode this way. I ask people because we cover so many different things during the
Yeah.
conversation. Are there one or two things that you hope people take away from your episode?
Yeah, I think I want people to, I guess there's kind of two things. Like one is um, that that there are lots of different ways for groups of people to do stuff together, right? Um, and that it's, I guess and maybe this is the second thing, and that it's never going to be perfect, and you always have to be striving to do things better. And that and that also, I guess, groups of people are not mechanical. We are not machines that get tinkered with. We are strange, complicated, or complex, actually, which I distinguish between those two things, systems and of emotion and logic and life experience and what the temperature is like today and what we ate for breakfast. Like there's so
Yeah.
much going on when even just two people come together and you get 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people in the room, and it gets incredibly complex. And so, and actually mess is kind of a part of it,
Yeah.
but you can also always find ways to do it better.
Yeah.
So,
That's great.
yeah.
Very, very true and very helpful. So, thank you again so much, Bob. Appreciate you, folks. Have an awesome day. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon.